Lester, Wushu engineer. Today what I'd like to talk about a little bit is gun defense, and we're going to do a few experiments to ascertain something that has been a subject of contention regarding gun defense for quite some time, and that is whether gun defense is legitimate, whether it will work at all. Now, of course, it's even though it might be a hot topic of debate on YouTube or on social media, gun defense and various defensive movements against handguns and rifles have been in use for a very long time, essentially ever since firearms became a part of modern warfare. There have been methods used to either disarm or render a shooter incapable of continuing at short and very close ranges. And of course there are systems like Krav Maga, for instance, and our own self-defense system called TKT, Tactical Kung Fu Training, which was actually developed in South Africa and has as its backbone the power and structure of traditional Kung Fu, but is also very heavily influenced by South African military training. Actually, some of the training that was used to train some of the special forces operatives during the 1980s. So that's where we draw a lot of our technique and training methods from for TKT. But either way, TKT and Krav Maga and systems like that have a lot of handgun defense and disarms involved in them. Now, I was watching a YouTube video a little while ago in which the maker of the video, the creator of the video, is obviously very highly skilled firearms expert, and one of his statements was more or less essentially that handgun defense or defensive movements or disarms don't work. Of course, he qualified that later by stating that later in the video he qualified it by stating that what he was actually saying was that people who teach handgun defense should actually be firearms enthusiasts, or at least be qualified to use firearms themselves, and that I wholeheartedly agree with. But it raised an interesting question. As I said, that it has been a topic of debate from time to time, which is whether handgun defense actually works. Of course, as we know, it is being used. So there are systems like Krav Maga taught to the Israeli military that are actually being used, and successfully so, including handgun defense. So really it is a bit of a moot point. But I thought that it might be interesting to do some tests and look at it scientifically, do some scientific tests to prove that, either prove that they do or prove that they're ineffective. So first of all, I have to explain the concept of handgun defense in the first place, and what it is useful for and what it isn't useful for. Handgun defense is only useful in a very, very, very limited number of applications. It's certainly not Hollywood, what Hollywood would have you believe. And those limited applications of handgun defense will usually involve will always involve an inactive shooter. So someone who is not actually running around gunning people down. An active shooter is outside of the scope of standard handgun defense. So we're talking about an inactive shooter, and we're talking about a situation in which the defender believes that the inactive shooter, once they have either threatened them or drawn the gun on them or something like that, once they have gotten what they want from them, that they will kill them. Because in any other situation, in any other case, where essentially someone is just using a firearm as leverage to get something from the defender, like whether it's money or the car or the keys to their car or anything like that, any material possession, handgun defense should really not be used. because it is a dangerous situation to get involved in, because the instant that you start some form of defense, you have to carry it through to its conclusion, and it either works or it doesn't. And any kind of mistake that is made while applying handgun defense can cost the defender their lives. So if there is a way of bringing the situation to a close, in other words, escaping from that situation alive without actually directly physically intervening, then the defender should actually use that out instead of actually placing themselves in danger. So we're talking about a very, very, very select few situations where someone would have a pistol or a firearm drawn on you, and they're inactive, and you know for a fact that they are most likely going to kill you after they have gotten whatever they wanted from you. And in that situation, the stakes are high enough, and the odds are so firmly against you that it's actually worthwhile engaging in physical confrontation, because you're more than likely going to die anyway. So it's better to then essentially take your best shot at it and actually try handgun defense. So that's really just to put things into perspective, because I think a lot of people blow the idea of handgun defense completely out of proportion and think that it's either one way or the other. So either they think that it's completely useless and has no place, or they think that everyone out there should be able to do Matrix-style disarms on active shooters, and that's nonsense. When we're talking about an active shooter, we're really talking about a survival situation in which you are going to be looking for cover, trying to use cover and concealment, and the geography of the situation in order to extricate yourself and others that you can from that dangerous situation, and leave the active shooter to the professionals to deal with. Because charging at an active shooter, unless there's no other alternative, unless your life was definitely going to be forfeit, is most likely an act of suicide. So what we're going to do in terms of the testing, I'll explain the testing procedure now, and we'll go into the testing a bit later. What I'm going to do is there are two stages to gun defense, and the way that gun defense works is that the defender actually is the one who initiates the event, because as soon as something starts happening, the firearm wielder is more than likely going to start essentially pulling the trigger, so to fire a shot. So essentially, it's a race against time for the defender to get the firearm out of the way. In other words, to shift themselves and the firearm in such a way that the trajectory of the projectile is actually going to miss them, going to move past them. And the reason that this is, I believe, a possible solution is that it's not your reaction, or at least it's not the defender's reaction against the pull of the trigger. It's actually the defender's reaction time and movement time against the reaction time of the firearm wielder. So in other words, it's actually the defender's movement time against the reaction time of the firearm wielder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure my movement time for a simple movement, like the kind of movement that we would use to shift a firearm out of the way. I'm going to test that movement time against my reaction time for a visual stimulus and pulling a trigger. So in other words, from the time when a visual stimulus hits me to the time when I pull the trigger. And we'll compare those values and see how they stack up against each other, and whether it is a feasible solution to use the opening movements of gun defense. Of course, from that opening move where you're essentially moving the firearm out of the way and moving your body out of the way of the oncoming projectile, there's a series of other things that can happen, and that's the sky's the limit as far as that's concerned in terms of disarms. And we're not really looking at the disarm stage. We're really just looking at that first stage. So the way that the sequence works is that there's a redirection or a shifting, a deflection of the firearm, and then there's a capture where you're confining the firearm or the firearm wielder in some way so that they can't shift the firearm from that point, and then you're doing a disarm. And that all happens very rapidly, so within the space of a couple of fractions of a second. So we'll go straight into the testing and we'll see what comes up. I'm very interested in doing this to see how the movement versus reaction time stacks up. All right, we'll see you in the testing section. Welcome to the first part of the testing. So what we're going to test now is my movement speed from a standard position that we might be in prior to performing a gun defense, and the first movement, which is the intervention where I make contact with the firearm or the hand of the wielder. So just to explain briefly what the experimental setup is. This is very jerry-rigged, so apologies for that, but I just threw something together really quickly. I've got a tactile micro switch over here, which I'm going to be making contact with to begin with. So it's going to be, I'm going to depress the switch. Once I release my hand from this point, this timer will start timing. From this point, I'm going to make contact with the side of the top arm on the speed and precision station here. This has a series of capacitive touch sensors built into it. So the instant that my hand makes contact with the side of this top arm, the timer will stop timing. Now I can't really set the timer up so that you can see it because the display is way too small, so you're just going to have to trust me on it. I'll read it out as we do the tests, and then I'll record them. And of course the timer I'm using is the IUC Industrial Equipment multi-timer, which is a standard laboratory style timer. So we'll get right into it. So I'm going to make contact with the micro switch. I'm going to reset the timer, and from there I'm going to be ready and then make contact. So that's 0.14. I'll record that. 0.148 seconds. I'll make contact again, reset, and so that's 0.134. I make contact, stop, reset, and again, it's 0.16. Make contact again, stop, reset, and 0.15. Oops. Make contact, stop, reset. Oops. 0.147. Make contact, switch, stop, reset. That's 0.155. contact, switch, reset, 147. So we'll do 3 more. Contact, stop, reset. 152. Contact, stop, reset. 16. And 1 more. Contact, stop, reset. 144. And those were all in seconds. Okay. And now we'll go into, well, as soon as I can get everything set up, we'll go into the testing for the trigger pull. Okay. Hi, welcome to the second part of the testing. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be testing my response time from seeing a visual stimulus, which will be the light on the speed and precision station lighting up, and from the point where that light comes on to the point where I pull the trigger. This is my wife and training partner, Sherilyn. She's going to be assisting me by pushing the button to activate both the timer and the visual indicator light. I'll be operating the timer. Once again, I can't put the timer in front of the camera because in the first place the display is too small, and in the second place I need to operate it here while I'm but I'll be recording and calling out my values every time. So what we'll do is we'll just start the timer, I'll reset, and I'll get into position. So that's 0.173. Reset that. Stop, reset the timer. I'll get into position again. So that's 0.14. Reset that. Reset the timer, get into position again. That's 0.148. Get into position again. 0.16. 0.162. Reset. 0.161. Set that. Set the timer. 0.0582. I think that's an outlier. I think I had a feeling of when Sherilyn was going to push the button, so I obviously had some body language coming through, so I think I'll record it, but I think that we should actually ignore that 0.058. Okay. Don't give me any body language, please. Okay. So that's 0.175. Reset. So that's 0.143. Do 3 more. 0.156. .141. One more. .16. Okay, I'll tidy this up and we'll see you in the conclusions section. Welcome to the conclusions section of this video. Well, that was actually a really interesting and surprising result. I'm actually quite surprised by the outcome of that experiment, because I went in expecting a certain outcome, and it was not quite as clear cut as what I thought it was going to be. I went in expecting that the movement, so in other words that very first movement that we do, was going to be significantly faster than the reaction time to pull the trigger. But as it is, and these are the results, I'll let you know what the averages are. There is a difference. So the movement time, in other words, the time to actually get the hand into place next to the firearm or the hand of the wielder, was on average, the average value was 0.149 seconds, so 0.149 seconds. And the reaction, not the reaction time, but the response time, because of course when we're talking about reacting to a visual stimulus and pulling a trigger, it's no longer just a reaction time, it's response time, which is reaction time plus movement time. And in this case, the movement is the pulling of the trigger. So the response time for the trigger pull was 0.155. So 0.149 to 0.155. That's a very slight difference. As I said, quite surprising, but a difference indeed. So in this case, I've proved that the movement to get into place next to the firearm is actually faster, but only marginally so, than the speed to pull the trigger. But there are some caveats to that, and the first one is for systems like our own TKT system. We're not just moving the hand to get it into place next to the gun. So in other words, my body is not staying static and my hand moving into place. In fact, as the hand starts moving, my whole body is moving. So you could say that that the hand making contact with the firearm is actually just part of the backup, because by the time it's getting into place next to the firearm, the rest of my body should actually be out of the way of the oncoming bullet's trajectory. Okay, so this time is a little bit misleading, the 0.149, because prior to that time, your body should actually be out of the way. Caveat number 2 is the outlying figure, which I'll circle here on the list, the one that we ignored in calculating the average for the trigger pull, 0.058. Now, the reason that I'm bringing that up is because for all of the other tests involving the trigger pull, I tried to maintain my focus entirely on the visual cue, the indicator light, because I didn't want to skew the results of that test. I believe that when it came time for that test, I allowed my focus, my awareness to spill out to incorporate my wife and training partner, and she gave me some kind of visual cue. It wasn't conscious, it was just something in her body language that indicated she was about to do something. That kind of projection of intent can be detected as we've seen in this test. And if you indicate your intent to do something, so if you communicate that intent to your aggressor in some way, it doesn't really matter how fast your movement time is, because you will be shot before you get a chance to actually really even start moving. And that's why it's so important to understand how to mask your intent. So in other words, how to control your mind and your body language so that you don't communicate your intent to move or do anything aggressive to your opponent when it comes to things as time critical as handgun defense and firearm defense. So some really interesting results there. They're very interesting that those two averages are so close. And as I said, the caveats here that need to be considered are the facts that, first of all, when you're starting to move your hand, you're also moving your body out of the way. So it's not just moving your hand into place. That needs to happen. That needs to be in place. And secondly, if you signal your intent prior to doing any action, you signal your intent, if you communicate it to your opponent, then none of these results matter, because you will most likely be shot before you get a chance to actually do anything. So yeah, a really interesting video and surprising results, and it's been fun putting it together. I hope you enjoy the content, and leave a like and a subscribe. And if you're interested in more content like this, then leave a comment in the comment section below. Thanks a lot. This has been Wish Your Engineer. I'll see you next time.